Welcome. All right.
Thank you.
It's a little bit nerve-wracking for me. John, thanks for dressing for the occasion.
Thanks.
This is a rigorous...
Dress for the job you want, not the job you have.
This is an important event, so I'm going to start with a bit of a tough question for you.
Yeah.
This session is called The Rigor of Laughter. Were you or were you not involved in naming this?
I mean, that was... I was not involved in it,
All right.
but the rigor of laughter is certainly right.
Because I don't know what it means.
What does it mean?
What does it mean?
It sounds like a kind of bullshit Freud essay.
The issue that I've heard you talk about before, and you and I have just talked about it, and you talked to other people about it, everybody seems to have a view of you as someone who, as a news guy, I see it, is really important to our information ecosystem.
If that's true, we're fucked. If I'm really important to an information ecosystem, the canary in the coal mine has just crossed its wings and lay down for the final time.
And Jon Stewart said the same thing on CNN years ago.
He was right as well.
He said it then. That, someone said, well, you do these things on your show. And he said, but I'm comedy. You're the news. Mm-hmm. And yet, since then, to this day, people conflate those two. And they feel that you are a remarkable, and I think they are right, a remarkable source of information and analysis and content and context. But you struggle with this because our worlds overlap. You work in our world to get content, but you don't believe that you're
I don't
news.
work in your world to get shot. We work in our own world, but we certainly use your world to tell the stories that we want to tell. Certainly, like without actual journalism, we would not be able to do the shows that we do.
So has your profession evolved to fit a time, or has this always been what comedy does?
I can't speak to like the profession in general. I can only speak to like what we wanted to do with this show at the point in time that we were starting it, which was when there was not, it was, John and Stephen had those two shows on Comedy Central. There wasn't a whole lot else. And so we wanted to try and find our place in an ecosystem that didn't feel like it needed us, really. It was just felt like, well, you're going to do one half an hour of comedy a week. We already have 4 of those coming from these 2 people. Is this strictly necessary? So I think what Tim Carvell and I had found, and then with Liz Stanton, we run the show together, that what we wanted to do was try and find ways to show people things they hadn't seen before. If there was anything that we learned early on in kind of developing the show, it was that being reactive in the way that we'd been taught to a decent level from Jon Stewart, being reactive to the news was just going to be us doing more of what we had been doing, but being more proactive and going and telling a story that wasn't necessarily being dictated by what we were watching on TV that week. That was more appealing to us. So that's when we started testing the audience's patience, really, with what people would listen to. In our second show at all on it, the first show we did was kind of easy just because it was the week that the Indian election was taking place in 2014, largest exercise in democracy in human history, and nobody was talking about it. And that seemed, well, that's easy, we'll just talk about that. So you're almost like forced into a really easy layup of the story because you can get so much energy from the initial sell of the story, which is, this is incredible and you haven't heard about it. Second week, we decided to do something on the death penalty, partly because I thought it would be funny to be so kind of suicidal in terms of what you're trying to do with a comedy show. And we did 12 minutes on the death penalty. And I thought that's all people would listen to, and I thought we'd be in trouble with HBO on Monday. And as it happens, people seemed to like it being that long. So now the idea that we talk about anything for 12 minutes is ridiculous. Normally there's 20, 25, 30, 35 minutes. Sometimes one story is longer than our entire show is supposed to be. And it's been a kind of happy realization that people have been willing to stay with us.
So what is that? Is it, tell me what the sauce is that causes people to stay with your stories that you often do. 13, 15, 20, 30,
Yeah.
30 plus minutes
Definitely.
on a topic that has not been in the news, that people
Right.
are not inherently familiar with.
Was not being loudly in the news.
Not
yeah.
being loudly in the news.
Yeah.
What is the filter? What is the overlay that you and your staff use to say, okay, there's this Indian election. There might be a reason why nobody has covered this,
Yeah, that's
but we're
fair.
going to do it at length.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, masochism. I mean, that's the kind of thing a therapist would ask you, like, what is wrong with you at your core that you think this would be interesting to someone?
Except you can say back to the therapist, it's working.
That's it. Therapists love that, don't they? But it's working. Oh, good, your adaptive behavior is working. Well, I think what the harder lessons that we've learned over the years have been how much you can explain to people in depth. Like, it feels like you have a certain amount of explainer capital in a story, and if you overestimate how much people can absorb, especially if they're coming at a story from zero.
Right.
If this is, well, I don't know anything about MLMs, or that's a bad example, because it feels like with those, you have a peripheral awareness. So you're kind of going and saying, you've seen your friend on Facebook posting about Herbalife. This is why Herbalife is essentially a pyramid scheme. But what's harder is to take them from something that they know literally nothing about. And for that, you kind of need a combination of some things that are just inherently funny, and you need to get a sense of how many things you have to explain in depth. Like, it's really triage, kind of intellectual triage of, if there are 4 important things in this story, which one of them do you want to explain significantly to people? Because if you try to explain all 4, you'll get nothing across. That's what we've found generally, as a mass generalization.
So when you think about the Indian election, or you think about net neutrality, what has to be miswired in your brain for you to look at net neutrality and say, I can find something funny in that?
Wouldn't it? Yeah.
Because you did a great job. I don't know if anybody saw, better than I have ever tried to do. And I get pipes and I try and show people things. You are
like
magical.
a chart, Ali. You love a chart.
I love a chart.
You love a chart, you love a flow chart, you love
I
a graphic.
do, but
the excitability on your face and say, look at this in graphic form. Here's what I just said in a large font.
That's exactly what we do. However, that's inherently funny. What do you do when I mean, are there people on your staff who say, I can find, well, maybe it's the irony, maybe it's, what makes a story into something that otherwise really good information that I would put on my show? What makes it great for your show?
Well, what we need a kind of conflation of circumstances. So we need there to be, if we get interested in a story, basically we'll have researchers look at it to work out if it's true, if the reporting on it is reliable, if the data inside it is reliable, if this is the right time to talk about it. Maybe the story is slightly shifted, maybe there is a solution in process from the government that we need to wait until we see if it works or not. Then we work out if there's footage to tell this story. Literally, do we have the basic ingredients through which we can put this story on television? Then we kind of work out, is there a way to tell this story in an arc which is going to feel coherent? And then, and only then, do we really start writing it.
And you actually feel it important in that arc to have a conclusion that is satisfying to me.
Well, I mean, you can't claim to solve every problem, otherwise you've become a messianic figure who needs to be destroyed immediately. But I think what we do find is that if you are going to talk about something, you being we, if we're going to talk about something for 25 minutes, you kind of have to point to at least some sense of potential solutions at the end of it, even if at that point it is really a matter of opinion. And even if you're only solving a small subsection of that problem, because it feels like the worst thing to do is to kind of take people by the hand and say, well, let's walk into this complicated forest together, and then 25 minutes later say, and that's it. Bye. That's not particularly satisfying. You want to point to a potential exit, even if that is what we feel would be the best solution.
I'm sort of fascinated because I look at the complicated material that you take, and I'm sure this is why so much of your viewership loves what you do, and it seems that there's nothing John Oliver cannot make me understand. So what are the things that you haven't tried yet, that have stymied you, that you've wanted to do, but it hasn't quite hit yet, and it may be, it may that...
Sometimes it's that it doesn't feel like there's a right time to tell, it's not the right time to tell the story. Sometimes it's that there isn't enough footage yet, or that you're kind of waiting for a big investigation. You need more national data on a subject. Sometimes you don't want to be trafficking in purely anecdotal examples. Sometimes you can make a case out of saying the absence of data is a problem in this story, but you still need something to kind of foundationally hold what you're saying upright. Sorry, what was the question?
Is there anything that stumped you? Is there anything that you
No, not
on your board that you want to do?
Oh, yes.
Haven't been able to.
All the time. I mean, that's what we're doing right now. Is we're researching a whole bunch of stories now, and they are falling apart for various reasons. or it's if we're looking at something really complicated, then you want to make sure that you get it right, because sometimes we're in kind of legally spicy areas, and you want to make sure that if you do get sued, you don't lose that lawsuit. Speaking both hypothetically and specifically.
People say to you, they thank you for helping them stay sane. They really believe that you are a person who has a prominent role in our political zeitgeist right now. And you resist that. I've noticed in interviews you push that back. You don't want to feel like you're a player in our political environment, but you are.
Well, I don't think so. I think that's kind of
fake news.
I don't think that's it's certainly not a fact with an uppercase F. But no, I don't really know what that even means. Like a player in news. I think
you influence thought. You are an influence of thought. I think that's fair to.
I guess there's
without being indulgent.
I guess there's a few things there, right? Like whenever someone says thank you, it's nice objectively, but it's awkward being targeted at me anyway, because I am just the...
Just pretend it's you and me.
Sure. I'm the unfortunate face of a lot of people's work, so it's very much a collective group of people that have made our show over the years and now. And also, there's just no real time for us to think about the ripple effects of our show, and I don't think it would be particularly healthy or constructive even to engage in that. We're always worried about the next thing that we're doing. We started off making our show, we would come in the first day of that working week, which for us is a Wednesday, and would say, okay, so what should we talk about this week? And that was a recipe for disaster in hindsight, because what you would do is you'd start writing the story, and then 2 days later, research would come in with a bunch of new information, or information disproving what you've been building on top of, and the whole thing washes away, and now it's Friday evening, and you have a show on Sunday, and you're very nearly fucked. So we started expanding the way that we built those stories in terms of like our production process. So now we're working on 5 stories at one time, 5 of those long A-block stories at one time, meaning that as we finish one, we're still worried about the next 4.
And is there a sense of what an A-block story should be in terms of content and length, or do you allow the story to determine that?
We've been really lucky, partly because of where we do the show. Essentially because sometimes HBO will let us blow long.
Yeah.
So if you want to have a conversation with someone, especially that, right? It's like in talking to Edward Snowden, you want to set a whole bunch of the table before you even get him to talking about anything, because it's an exercise in trying to understand something that takes a gigantic amount of technological expertise to get your head around. So you kind of want to get some of that work done before he's able to talk in shorthand about it, and there was no way that we could do that in 30 minutes. So we're lucky that HBO will let us go long, and also we're really, really lucky, I'm sure you will appreciate this as well, that we don't have to dump out for an ad break. Not just because it feels like it might undermine your your case for bail reform if you have to say, and now a word from Twix. But also because, like, in terms of how you're holding people's attention and trying to get new information into their heads, taking a break for 4 minutes is not a great thing. Like, you want to be able to ride momentum in a story. So the fact that we can have people's undivided attention for 30 minutes is really important. And it's that, almost as much as anything, that means we are able to talk about stories at length. You don't have to take a break in the middle of what you're saying and then reposition people in this part of the story that you left them 4 minutes ago before Colonel Sanders.
So for you and your team, what does success on a story feel like? Is it laughs? Is it ratings? Is it the sheer success of the project in terms of what you started off wanting to do?
That's a good question. I think it's internal. It's not ratings, because HBO say they don't care about ratings, but then they do cancel shows. So I don't think we have much pressure on us in terms of HBO because we're such a small player in their world. So it's not ratings. How do you? I think it's probably an internal thing of like, do we feel like we got across what we were trying to say in a way that people could understand and that had some really silly things in it as well? You do this remarkable job, as do many in your genre today, of doing things that make people laugh, but that maybe this is the rigor of laughter thing, but that they know it wasn't just a joke like everybody else tells. It's rooted in, you keep talking about research, you keep talking about facts, you keep talking about the work that you do. And I think that people like you communicate that. You get across to the viewer that, wow, this guy put work into this that feels like journalism. I honestly cannot speak to everyone else's shows.
Right.
I can only speak to our own example. I do not know what their fact-checking process is. I cannot.
So tell us about yours.
So for us, obviously, it's maybe it's not obvious, but it's incredibly important that what we say is true. Otherwise, all the effort that we've made in the story is completely pointless. You don't want to build a story on sand, otherwise it will just collapse. And therefore, you've undermined every point you've been trying to make and every beautifully stupid joke you've tried to tell. The whole thing collapses. So it's very, very important to us to make sure that what we're saying can't be knocked over by someone saying, yeah, but that study is of 100 people. That doesn't really tell you anything. You can say that like it means something, but it doesn't really until you have proper peer-reviewed evidence to back that up. So it's really for our peace of mind. If we're going to take big swings, and we do take big swings, you want to make sure that you are as sure as you can be about it. Otherwise, best case scenario, your story collapses and you undermine the case that you're trying to make and the case for everyone in that story. Worst case scenario, your show's over.
So when you talk about big swings and you talk about the case you're trying to make, and we use some of the examples of stories that you've done, whether it be Edward Snowden or you said MLM, or I was talking about net neutrality, there's so many examples of them. It seems like you've chosen a topic in which you have taken a big swing and you have made a case. So I'm trying to figure out, does success look like people who otherwise hadn't been thinking about it a certain way? Because all of these things have an outcome that would be fixed by regulation, politicians doing something right, people voting a different way. Tell me, that's where I'm trying to get to.
I see.
Where do you know that you exist in that sphere? How do you think about that?
I think you're asking a British person what success looks like, and I just don't know. I don't know what it looks like. I don't know what it feels like. I don't even know what it smells like. I don't know. Like I say, I think it's our barometer is internal of whether we've done a good job or not on the story. So when weeks that we're frustrated, it's normally because we think, oh, if we'd had another week, or if we'd changed structurally the way we told that story, maybe we'd have got that. Maybe it would have been more coherent when you're trying to force it into people's heads. It's all internal, really. Does
being British or not being American help you tell a story of our time? Does the perspective
I think
help you?
As a comedian, an outsider perspective, regardless of whether it's your nationality or the way you pronounce words, I think an outsider perspective always helps. And as someone who came to America a decade and a half ago now and loves it here so much, so there is you do have a fresh eye when you first get here on, oh, that's an interesting way to set up your judiciary. Of course, years ago, when Britain had an empire, you'd say, we can fix that, don't worry, hold my stick. But I think an immigrant's love affair with a country, I think it means that I have, like, the frustrations I feel in stories is real, is the ownership of a country that I've fallen for and that, I think of as my home. Sometimes there are stories that I have personal connections to. Like my wife was in the army, so we did a story early on about translators who worked with the troops in Afghanistan and Iraq, which was incredibly close to home. So it's not always that I have a personal connection to a story like that, but I think in general, I have an outsider's eye because I wasn't born here and this was this is a political system that was unfamiliar to me as a child, so it still doesn't feel viscerally make sense to me that this is how healthcare works in this country. But I also kind of have an insider's commitment to a story because I'm invested in the consequences of it.
And how is that love affair with America going?
Well, that's a good big question.
Are you in therapy? America?
I do. I really, really love it here, and it's. I think it speaks to just how much immigrants love it here. That they love it here now, which you could make a solid case is not historically America at its best. But yeah, I think as an immigrant, I'm all in on America. I believe it can be better. To slightly extrapolate Melania Trump's appalling phrase.
You have been asked, and I find this interesting because if you look, there are lots of people in America who think the moment that we are in is uniquely American, and there are certain people to blame for it. But in fact, there were precursors. There have been a bunch of things happening in the world that have been centered around nativism and populism.
Sure.
That have led to the moment we're in. And you actually, I think you were asked if you could undo the last election or undo Brexit, what would you do? And you said Brexit.
Brexit is like a generational problem. It's, like this particular presidency will be over in, 5, 9, 13 years. Who knows? It doesn't seem 100% clear. But the Brexit decision is really bleak and is going to take generations to recover from, if it's possible to recover at all.
And do you think to some degree that it has set the table for these nationalist movements that we're seeing?
I don't know. I think it would be pretty arrogant for Britain once again to say, we started it, and then the ripple was felt around the world. But I certainly think the Brexit vote was a symptom of something very big that was happening around the world and unfortunate. And I think the kind of slide towards authoritarianism is coming from some of the same nativist impulses that you saw in the Brexit vote.
Let's talk a little bit about how you come together with a story, how this happens. I have had the good fortune, it's always exciting when I see a little clip from one of my shows on your show, and I wonder, how do you get there? There's so much stuff that's out there in the world. How do you make decisions about what happens, how you put it together? Where does it come from? We
do it collectively, so we have an amazing staff, and we've kind of worked, we've built this process together over the years. So, at the end of a couple of weeks, researchers will have a research packet. Footage producers will have a gigantic 300-page document of transcripts from various places to tell different parts of a story, both kind of primary source footage, people like yourself delivering data in a way that helps, because it's, I don't have consistent enough authority sometimes to tell you a number or a fact in a way that makes you believe it's true, especially if I've just said something profoundly stupid beforehand. So it is helpful to have someone present that number, that data, in a way that we can react to. So that is where you come in.
Do you, everybody sit around and come up with ideas before you send the research and the video people out?
Everyone in the whole show, in every single job in the show, can pitch ideas, and then we'll decide, oh, this seems like something that we can bring something to like show people stuff they haven't seen, and then we'll just start stress testing that story through the different departments to work out if it's got legs.
How do the jokes fit in?
Jokes fit in. Well, this is what we learned from Lake. The jokes are kind of everything, like, because that is the like shovelfuls of sugar that we're using to kind of make the story go down in a way, and so it's really they are without the jokes we really have nothing. That's what we traffic in. It's just you want to make sure that foundationally those jokes are solid, but they need to come late. We learned that from the Daily Show when John would get angry, it would be when a story was falling apart towards the end of the day, not when jokes were falling apart. You can fix jokes quickly. You can't fix a story quickly. So you need to spend a lot of time early on making sure that what you have to say is going to stand up. Then the fun.
So when you're building that story, you're building it the way we might do it in news, or a documentarian or filmmaker might build it. You're building the story, and you'll figure out a way because of your perspective or the perspective of your writers, because you are inherently humorous, that you can find that.
Yeah, I mean, we'll build it sometimes with a view to, and this particular way of telling this story will lend itself to, will lend itself better to jokes, or if you're building to a particularly ridiculous conclusion, like if it's using a story about Gurbanguly Berdimuhamedov in Turkmenistan to pivot into a story about the behavior of Guinness World Records, which ends in a 6,000 square foot cake. Or if it's using the fact that we've been sued for a couple of years to talk about slap suits to end in a musical. It's not always that beautifully linear, if you could describe that as linear. But we've always got in mind, like, is this structure going to be, a decent way, not just to make the story make sense, but also to hang all of our jokes on?
Because you can go for some time in your stories without there being anything obviously funny.
In the stories, yes, of course, I would hope we don't. We try not to go really at all without a joke. We like to have a joke after every single clip, sometimes after every single statistic, every number. We want jokes constantly because that's what we love the most in all the world. So we try and cram it with as many jokes as densely as possible, coming from all different angles. So, like, in terms of like what really feels great, sometimes it's when we've done something monumentally stupid. Sometimes that's what you feel the most proud of, is misusing HBO's resources to a borderline criminal extent. But if you can kind of fuse the two, if you can do a really complicated story with unbelievably stupid stuff on top of it, that's just the greatest feeling. Yeah.
The beauty of comedians, whenever we speak to them, is that they have this remarkable ability to either not take themselves all that seriously or say that they don't. Is that hard?
That's a fair hit. A passive-aggressive hit, but a good one.
Is this time different for you? In other words, is this place that we're in where people do come up to you and express gratitude in a way that may have been different than they did before? Does that feel different to you? You understand that people are maybe expressing something different than they would have 5 years ago when they said, "Wow, you're amazing. I love watching you every week because you're hilarious." Yeah. Now it feels like you're providing a service, or at least some people, as they've approached you,
I don't know what that service is, really.
But people do thank you for it. So
they thank me for whatever service I'm providing. Yeah.
Do you get that the service feels different than it might have outside of this environment?
I don't know. I think I don't know if I feel like what we're doing is particularly different, because I think we've tried to stay away. When we started, right under the last few years of the Obama administration, we tried not to traffic too much in the daily stories of the week. which is why we were spending so much longer at the very start of our show saying, look what's happening in Libya, look what's happening here. Now, with the Trump presidency, the problem is that what's happening is coming so thick and fast. It's really an exercise in sifting through what is worthy of attention. A bunch, honestly, isn't. A bunch of it is chaff, but you want to make sure that you're not making an editorially dicey decision by just ignoring something because it's complicated. So, which is a long way of saying that I think we have tried not to have the Trump administration cannibalize that first 10 minutes in our show, but it has been difficult. We used to do a lot more stories from around the world quickly at the start of the show, and now it's hard because,
well, it takes most oxygen out of most rooms.
Definitely, yeah.
I mean, it is hard.
And because we feed from that is very much a problem because also we're downstream from needing footage. He is cannibalizing so much, as I'm sure you are personally painfully aware, that it is hard to swim against the stream and say, no, don't look at that thing, look at this.
Yeah.
And sometimes it's impossible, and you shouldn't. But sometimes it's really important to say, the fact he said kefefe is literally nothing. This is emblematic of nothing. It's best avoided.
What do you, does this affect you, or is this part of the job? Does the job feel different to you in this environment than it did a few years ago, or are you just good at, you can do that and you can have your own life and you don't get as wrapped up in it?
Again, I feel like we probably, other than other shows, are wrapped up less in, or less completely in Trump administration ephemera. So the vast majority of our long A-block stories are not primarily to do with Trump. So in that way, it doesn't actually feel different. As a human being, of course, it feels very different.
I look with great admiration at those A-block stories that you do, but I wonder, because I often think, and my executive producers here, we often discuss doing things that are that complicated or longer, and often there's someone in the room who might say to you, "Are you crazy?" How does that process work with you? Have you just done it successfully enough that people trust that you and your team will execute as you hope to?
Yeah, we lucked into it in a way. We were very fortunate that when we started the show, we even built an interview area and at the edge of our set, just because I thought that's what you had to do. I thought you would do 2 segments and then you'd do an interview with someone because that's what people wanted.
Right.
So we built this thing. And it was after we just did 2 test shows, and it was after the second test show that HBO had said, you don't have to have that. You don't have to talk to someone. If you'd rather have another 6 minutes to plow into your story, you should do that. And it felt like a trap. Okay, well, I would love not to do that. I'd love not to have human contact with someone I don't know. And so we were able to put that into the story, thinking that people probably still wouldn't watch it, but then they did. And so we were very, very lucky. It was partially following our instinct, and it was partially having incredible support from HBO at the time of saying, make the show that you want to make, which you could argue is take as much rope as you want to hang yourself. But in the end, it's like they don't watch the show. And if that's true, may it continue.
34 minutes on that, right? Is there any time that you think you've come close to using that rope to hang yourself? Are there moments, things you've done that were just obviously didn't work, weren't the right thing to do, or is it not?
Weren't the right thing to do? How do you mean?
Something that really didn't work. Something you've done on the show that you were really hopeful for and it didn't land.
I don't think the amount of rope would ever come into that. I think sometimes it was, those are always the best lessons are the hardest ones, right? So we've learned more from mistakes over the years. We're thinking, okay, so how did we kind of shortchange people's work on that story? Because that's what's really bleak to me, knowing how hard our staff works. and you work exactly as hard on stories that don't turn out the way you want to as ones that do. So it's just wanting to make sure that we hadn't done anything not repeat mistakes, basically, that we haven't done anything that damaged people's work rather than added to it. Like at its best, you want every single person in every department building on something so it is truly better than the sum of its parts. With the Bob Murray thing, that was what was so fun, that we did that song at the end. So much of the production of that song I had no idea about. But by like 6 years in, I trust production side so completely that I was literally driving to Times Square, seeing like all these big trucks and lights, and I caught myself thinking, oh, there's a movie being shot here. That's really cool. And then I saw one of our interns carrying waters and thought, oh shit, that's us. Oh no, this has got out of hand. But that is the most fun. But to get back to your original question, I don't think our freedom has ever been a problem with a story, ever, at all. Like unanimously, that's never been a problem. I think it has been working out how best to respond to that freedom.
You can feel free to answer any question you want. My questions are not nearly as good as your answer. But I think everybody who watches your show fully understands the type of work that goes into that. So for your staff's benefit, let them know that we see that. I think
thanks.
people
I
know
really
that stuff
that.
doesn't just
Thank you. Thanks
happen
very
on
much.
TV.
They work so hard.
Yeah, well, you can see it.
Yeah, I am incredibly proud of them, and they are utterly exhausted. They've just got to the end of the year, and they're all still working, but we're working without having to do shows right now, which is the dream.
What does I don't know if you have time to think about it, or you don't strike me as somebody who devotes a lot of time to thinking about it. But where, after however many years of this administration are left, which, as you said, is unclear, what does a future look like for you? Or you don't really tie it to the administration. You don't think about it as
I don't think it makes any difference to us as a show. Again, it makes it
because you'll go back to the stories
difference.
that you want to do if the President of the United States isn't driving the whole story.
We've still been doing them.
Yeah.
So, like that doesn't really change. Like those A-block stories are pretty like thematically inconsistent in the same way as they were under the Obama administration. We have really tried as much as we can to ring-fence those stories from...
So you're not somebody who's going to say, as much as some people think the world would be a better place under a different administration, it may hurt TV, or it may hurt cable, or it may hurt comedy. You don't share that.
It will not hurt comedy. You mean Trump not being president anymore will not hurt comedy at all. It's quite the reverse. It will make comedy much, much better.
Because?
It's not good for comedy, like this guy. Partly because, the really reductive way to say it is that it's kind of self-satirizing, but it's much more complicated than that, because, when you're trying to tell a joke about something, normally you're trying to, take something that means something, and then, find something trivial to say. Often what he's saying is, it's not just that it doesn't mean anything, it's that there is something really meaningful inside the nothing that he's saying. But you have to kind of inject protein into it to then show how it's a problem. And that is just not a kind of, intellectual gastronomy that everyone should be engaging in. It's too complicated. It doesn't... Or you get really lazy comedy. And I think, bad politicians for years have, produced bad comedy.
All right, well, we will leave it there, John. What a pleasure to have this conversation.
Oh, thanks very much. Thank you.
Thank you
Thank
for
you.
all you do. And thank you
Of course,
for
thank you,
taking the time
Ali.
to be with
You
us.
too.
Ladies and
Thanks a
gentlemen,
lot.
John Oliver.
Thank you. Oh.